Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Theoretical Tea and Company. I am your host, Dr. Janice Marie Collins. We're here for a special edition of Spotlight on Research. I am excited about having you all here today because how can you be excited about research? I am. I hope you are too, because our special guest talks about not only making sense out of data, but also including human beings and how do we tell stories? How do you tell stories with data that really matter? And what is the research there? So this is really, really exciting. Thank you so much for joining us today. So the name of the book is The Data Analytics Advantage: Strategies and Insights to Understand Social Media Content and Audiences. The publisher is Oxford University Press. This book just came out. It's hot on the presses, as we would say. And it introduces readers to the power of data analytics in the age of AI-driven communication. Right there, that's a mouthful right there, because of the fact that AI, anything, is hot right now. And so this is really wonderful. We have an expert and a researcher here who wrote the book on AI-driven analytics and what it does, which for this book, it introduces readers to the power of data analytics in the AI-driven communication. I wanted to make sure you understood that. So if you're into AI, please listen up. Using the DAV framework, which stands for Discovery, Analysis, and Visualization, the book equips you with the skills to gather, interpret, and present data in ways that inform decision-making, uncover audience insights, and tell persuasive stories. Drawing on real-world case studies, hands-on exercises, and both qualitative and quantitative approaches, the book bridges theory and practice for the next generation of professionals navigating digital platforms. I would also say, in reading just a little bit of the book, I just got the book, so I wasn't able to finish it. But in reading it, I want to say that it's not just for the professionals, also for the researchers. It's also for individuals that you may be starting off and using data, and how do you tell stories with data. I think this is a good grounding for you when you read this book, and understanding as you progress, the book stays with you and the information stays with you. So speaking of which, let me get back to my guest here now. It's time for me to introduce my guest who can tell us a little bit more about the book better than I can. Dr. Lake Khan is an associate professor in the School of Media Arts and Studies at Ohio University and the founding director of the Social Media Analytics Research Team, better known as the Smart Lab. I love that. The Smart Lab, right? You feel even smarter just saying it. Is wonderful. His research examines social media analytics, audience engagement, digital inequality, and AI-driven communication. An educator and consultant with international experience, Dr. Khan also serves as chief editor at Oxford University Press's Social Media in Society and Culture Intersection series. This is his latest book, The Data Analytics Advantage. And what it does, it offers you all a practical framework to help students and professionals and researchers and experts leverage in data analytics for meaningful communication and for business outcomes, which entrepreneurship is huge. Business outcomes is really important. I want to welcome Dr. Khan. Welcome to Theoretical Tea and Company, Dr. Khan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Collins. It's a pleasure being here today.
The pleasure is mine. I want to first start off. I want to tell you, when you say data driven. Okay, I'm so driven by data that it can be overwhelming. So let me ask you, if you will, tell us what the big picture is about this book.
Sure. So first of all, data is all around us. We live in an age where we talk about concepts such as information overload, data overload. We're dealing with practically a deluge of data. Mm-hmm. So when we are looking at social platforms, for example, audiences, the social media use is very pervasive. Audiences are on generating tons of data. And it was very important to understand that data so that we can make better decisions and at a practical level, have a much better life. So businesses, organizations, individuals, all are touched by data. And it is very imperative that we make sense of this data so that we can improve our outcomes.
That's very good. And so that's really, really important. So when you're talking about your purpose, and if you haven't received your book yet, I want to give you a great shot of this book here. It's really wonderful. Is that what inspired you to write the book? Why? It's one thing to do the research on data. It's another thing to say, okay, I'm going to take everything that we know, everything we should know, and put it in a book. What inspired you to actually put this book together?
Okay, the inspiration is multifaceted.
Okay.
And I'll start with my days when I founded the SMART Lab, or the Social Media Analytics Research Team Lab. And I was also the person who was assigned to teach a course in social media analytics. In fact, I developed that course from the scratch. Having done consulting over the years and teaching at different universities in about 6 countries, I came to a realization that when we are in the business domain or the communication or sociology or education, no matter which discipline we are working in, there is this understanding, first of all, that data is overwhelming, and it could be very true. It can be overwhelming. But my task was that I wanted to make it easier for our audiences, our students, to understand. And I'll start with a small example. I consulted for various small businesses and medium-sized enterprises, and I came to a realization that they had data. They had data that was constantly generated through their social platforms and within their organizations, but they weren't really utilizing it to its maximum potential. So instead of relying on intuition, what we need is relying on numbers so that we can make better decisions and informed decisions. When data is converted into decisions, it has to be converted into impact. And that requires ethical responsibility, that requires data literacy, and that requires asking the right questions. All these things combine to make a successful organization. And I thought and realized through my experiences and my interactions with different stakeholders that there was a real gap in the understanding of what data can do for them. That was one of the motivations for coming up with this from a consulting perspective. At the student side, there wasn't a textbook that would combine these different diverse disciplines. So for example, a lot of the data analytics people feel is concentrated in computer science and informatics. And we in the communication program or business programs, where I've been teaching over the years, I realized that numbers were looked at something foreign to those disciplines until you required a certain degree of technical competency. And we're lucky in the field of communication and academia because our work is theoretically grounded. So to bridge this gap, it was very important to write a book that could impact so many different spheres of life.
Well, that's really interesting, and it is important. I like the way that you frame that. And what it basically is talking about, something else, is how you take the academia and the consulting and the analytics and make it make sense, right? If I can say that. Which brings me to another aspect of your book. There's a particular structure that you use, and it's known as the DAV framework, which stands for discovery, analysis, and visualization. So tell me a little bit more about that, why you chose that particular structure.
Great. That's a great question. So when I sat down to think about how this book can be easy and not overwhelming for especially students at the undergrad and graduate level, I realized that it has to have a structure that would be easy to digest. So it's a very natural progression of how things started and moved. Discovery is about curiosity. Isn't that the foundation for any work? When we are curious, we ask questions. And my book guides readers into asking the right questions that relate to the overall goals of the organization or business. When we ask the right questions, we also ask about where we can get this data. So data is available on various platforms. The questions and our objectives and goals guide us into where we want to get this data. Once we've got that figured out, we move on to the analysis stage, beyond discovery. So the analysis is about finding patterns and relationships between different data points or variables and making sense of them. And of course, this is the part where the crux of understanding data analytics lies. Because analysis can be of various types. We have textual analysis, we have sentiment analysis, we have images. There's so many millions of images are generated every day and shared on social platforms. How do we make sense of them? So there's a chapter on image and video analytics. We also want to understand how people connect to each other in different social networks. And that gave rise to a chapter on social network analysis. So these can be very detailed, in-depth fields in themselves, but I wanted a resource for students where they can see the big picture and go through the analysis stage into the last and the final stage, which is the visualization stage. And visualization is about telling an effective story based on that data. So I started off my conversation with a discussion on how we need to move beyond intuition into evidence-based understanding of what is going on. The DAV framework hence offers that journey or that framework where we can not only collect data, analyze it, but use that understanding to tell an effective story for what? For impactful decision making.
And and what it sounds like is also one of the key points that you've made is that when you wrote this book, what it sounds like in your explanation, but also the structure, but also in the framework, am I correct in saying this is what you've also described is how this book and the reason why you wrote it and the framework and style that you wrote it is because your focus was just as much on the people as it was on the data, not just how to gather the data, but how to speak about the data in a way that people would understand it, because they're dealing with people. Data, it's about what information do we know, or should we know, or have we discovered or revealed or found that will do this or that. But behind every data equation, there's a person. And I feel that when you're explaining this, it sounds like you do write it for the person, you do write it for the individual, but it's also data driven. Is that right?
Correct.
Can I say that?
Correct. You absolutely nailed it in a way. So I would like to say something very important here.
Okay.
Behind every data point is a human being. Much too often, we ignore or forget that human beings are the center of every endeavor, be it data science or any other discipline that we're working on. Human beings are there. They are the ones generating this data. How so? Every click we make, every interaction we do on social media, or even just being passive with the data and not doing anything. With those platforms, we're just not even clicking. We're just reading, viewing, watching. That is also generating data. So as a matter of fact, human beings are at the center of every activity online. And that is why it's very important to understand that human interaction on social media, because that could be in the form of a sentiment, a thought, an opinion. And we need to capture that to understand what is happening on social media, because it's very easy to go down that rabbit hole where we're just concerned with numbers and data, but it is about more than numbers. It's about gaining a deeper understanding of that human interaction.
Correct. And also, if I may, what it sounds like, there are a lot of individuals, even in my own research, where individuals feel like technology is technological determinism, is diffusion of innovation, where you feel that technology is leaving you behind, and that because you're not a computer, you don't think like a computer, that maybe we're worried about the human being that's left behind. But what you're saying is, if you understand how to use data, if you understand how data can actually, because it's happening, AI is happening, which I want to get into next specifically. This is a way actually where the human being can find themselves within data, and vice versa, where data is found in the way that we look and analyze certain aspects. So it's all three of those that you talk about, where it brings in the academic side of what you're doing. It brings in the consulting side of what you're doing. It brings in the analytics of what you're doing. It's really, really really interesting, which I'm really excited about, because part of the social psychology aspect of AI and data driven is not to lose the human being. And how do we do that? And I think that you pronounced that very well in how the book is written. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Spotlight on Research with Dr. Lake Khan, who just came out with a wonderful, wonderful book. This is a special edition of Theoretical Tea and Company. The name of the book is The Data Analytics Advantage, which is strategies and insights to understand social media content and audiences. And how timely is this book? When we talk about social media and the content, it is absolutely, as we would say, on time, which I want to get to the next part. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And again, thank you, Dr. Khan, for taking out time of from your schedule to do this.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that. So let me ask you this. I had another question. So how has the explosion of AI tools changed how we collect, interpret, and visualize data? And by that, because you've already kind of touched on that, but I want to go one more step further. The step I want to go to next is, are we becoming, because of this, are we becoming more insightful or more dependent on machines? Let me ask you that.
Okay, that's a question that requires a lot of time, but I'll try to sum it up in as little time as possible.
Okay.
So AI is the next biggest digital disruption. It is already it has already caused a lot of fear around the world, where people are concerned about their jobs and employment. How is it going to impact their work? So as a matter of fact, AI has created that disruption in positive and negative ways. Okay. So I'll start with the positives. Firstly, when we look at data analytics, it has made data collection, data analysis, visualization much, much faster. So it can be considered that we risk treating the data for human beings as just abstractions. That is not what we want to risk it. So while AI has made life easier for us, I consider it as a collaborator instead of something that's going to take our place. What I mean by collaborator is that it can also be viewed as an assistive technology. So let's go back in time when we had the latest search engines come up. So when Google was there, I still remember the time of Alta Vista when we had that as a browser.
Sure.
It was exciting. It was a major disruption. We were concerned what's going to happen next. But in a way, it made life better for us. Faster searches, lots of convenience. In a similar manner, AI is also making our lives easier, like I said, but on the downside, it can make everything very simple. And by that, I mean that we need to have deeper insights. As human beings, we need to have empathy. All this work needs to be grounded in ethical frameworks. And there's another thing that I'm working on as a research project, which talks about the role of AI and ethics grounded in a framework that is justice-centered. Mm-hmm. It's very easy for AI to not be inclusive as it should be. Mm-hmm. We are dealing with challenges of a different nature. And the first step is understanding those challenges. Down the road, 5 years from now or even earlier, we're going to see even more changes in how data can be analyzed. But we cannot ignore the centrality of the human being. And I think this ties in back to the previous point mm-hmm. about where people are at the center of any endeavor. And they should be.
Yeah. And let me ask you that. I know I just want to, and I know you can't explain all of it, but if I may, let me ask you, because you brought up ethics, which is really important, especially here in the Schoonover, where we have so many media platforms and schools here, where the main thing, especially involving human performance, is being ethical. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this. What is the most pressing ethical challenge? And I know there are many, but if you had to, just for the sake of this conversation, this podcast today, because I know other people are going to go out and get your book and be able to talk with you a little bit more on their own shows. What do you think is the most pressing ethical challenge in our data-driven area at this time that we're actually dealing with in this era of analytics, data driven, all of that.
So just because AI can help us generate charts, for example, a bar chart, and I'll start with this small example, it doesn't mean that that would be the best way of showing that information. Because understanding the human experience and the audiences is so important before we tell an effective story. And so this means while we can generate all these charts and do different kinds of analysis, find patterns, which AI can really help with, we need to understand that there needs to be algorithmic transparency from an ethical perspective and a very dedicated thought process that values inclusivity and making sure that we're getting the right data. So a lot of the AI-based analysis are going to be whatever data is available. And already there are challenges, even before the advent of AI, where marginalized voices are not getting their share. The algorithms determine what is viewed on social platforms. And that's where the problem is, because they are trained in a way that maximize engagement. Imagine there are content creators in developing countries, people of color. We have other non-mainstream producers of information and content, but that gets left out. So this might diverge into a different discussion, but looking at AI and data analytics in particular, our work needs to be grounded in empathy. So understanding the other side, understanding that human experience, using AI wisely, asking the right questions, but then making sure that our work is grounded in the realities of the world we're living in. And there's no one single solution for every problem.
And that's really interesting because we just in my class, in one of my classes, we just did a couple of quick moments of projects of research where we found that even though women make up the largest growing number of innovative leadership when it comes to developing platforms, they're not the top earners.
Correct.
They're not the top earners. So when you talk about marginalized groups, and I don't know what the data is why that's happening. I don't know if it's the topic. I don't know if it's specifically gender bias or anything along those lines. But it's really interesting. I think there's going to be, when you're thinking about using data and how to use data, I think is also, like you're saying, there's an opportunity to also help encourage and to develop the developer themselves, and how to be more inclusive in a way that's balanced, and how to be critical, right? Critical thinking of what to use and what not to use and why. You want to say a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
Critical thinking?
So you very rightly use the word critical thinking. And I would throw another word here that's going to complement what you just said. We need to look at data analytics in the age of AI as a critical literacy. So that literacy has to be imparted. And because of the fast pace of change, it's been so fast and very dynamic that we haven't even caught up in terms of our curriculum at a global level and a national level, where such literacies can be imparted so that people know how these algorithms work. So there needs to be greater transparency from the platforms. But from the analytics side, we need to be able to have the right data sets. And the access to data from social media is increasingly limited. And that's a challenge that we're facing. AI is a tool, just like any other tool. How we use it, that's another thing. And I think that requires a very clear understanding of our ethical role in this whole process. And also from a justice-centered framework, we want to ensure that there is inclusion. So you gave an example of women. The way AI models are trained, so a very classic example is if I ask you, if I just say that the CEO of company XYZ, do you think of a man or a woman? Right? So AI models are also trained in that way. We also have lots of small businesses which might be family owned, women run. And they do not at times have the literacy or the prowess to deal with large established entities that have got millions of dollars of budget to make sense of that data. So how do we instill this kind of literacy, especially AI literacy, so that they can be better decision makers for better impact.
Really interesting. And we could talk about this more and more. We're coming to the end of the show. Because basically, as you say with AI, people say what goes in is what comes out. And really it gets to the point in years to come when I think about one of my final questions, because you've talked really brilliantly about some of the advice you give students or practitioners in trying to make sense. You're talking about that being critical thinkers, things along those lines. And I had one final question for you. But when I'm thinking about, AI puts out what we put in, right? And so when you ask the question, when you think about CEOs and you think about companies, do we think of male, female? It almost, to me, sounds like an opportunity, not only you can't just pull from AI and say, oh, this is the truth. This is what it is. It also still has an opportunity for the human being to critique, investigate, discover, explore, research whether what AI is saying is true.
Exactly.
So that's a critical part of that, where it's actually, we look at it, a lot of people say, I'm developing AI to think like me or to do this. But I think what I'm hearing from you, and I have to finish the book, but what I'm hearing from you is not necessarily just to give all that up and say, I'm going to have AI think like a human being. And no, it's like an assistant, if you will, not a replacement, if you will, of the human mind, the human cognitive acumen that would be able to say, I like this AI, how it's being trained, but I still have power and ownership over the information that I disseminate to the world. Am I thinking about that?
So if I can go back to the discovery phase, where I introduced the discovery phase as having the necessary curiosity in asking the right question, it applies to all three stages in a way, because we're asking questions when we're analyzing, we're asking questions when we can generate charts and graphs in a few clicks of on the screen. Mm-hmm. But choosing which chart do we need to show?
That's so important.
That is very important. So if I may conclude with a very important sentence here, AI gives us the advantage. That's what the title of the book here is. But it's increasingly going to be about responsibility.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. What a great way to end it. Now, before we end, though, how do they get your book? If individuals are interested in getting your book, what do they do?
So they go to Amazon.
Okay.
It's available on Amazon for purchase. There's a hardcover, paperback, and an e-version as well.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I would imagine an e-version would be there with this type of book. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Theoretical Tea and Company, a special edition. We have a special edition of Spotlight on Research with Dr. Khan, Lake Khan, who just wrote the book, hot on the presses, The Data Analytics Advantage. Strategies and Insights to Understand Social Media Content and Audiences, published by the Oxford University Press. It is a book that I know will continue to have an impact, not only an impact, an important aspect of being integrated into schools and classes and courses, but also for the professionals who really want to go a little step further. I'm going to let you have the final word, Dr. Khan.
I want to, through this platform, thank all those people who messaged me, emailed me, and reached out to me to say how important this book has been for them, even though they just adopted it. But it has made their lives easier in their instruction, teaching, research, as well as from folks in the industry who are very interested in reading this book so that they can make better sense of data and make better decisions, which are impactful and responsible.
That's absolutely wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Theoretical Tea and Company. I'm your host, Dr. Janice Marie Collins. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.